Welcome to Intune Training, the place to learn how to use Microsoft Intune. The Steve and Adam show, again, with no Adam. I think he's camping again, which is always good. Good on him.
He's driving at the moment.
Driving, sure, okay. Well, that's good. Good for him. So in lieu of Adam, you get me, the intern, again.
Yay,
we have Steve on the call, and our good friend Nick has decided to join us because we're in Australia and we can't do anything at the moment. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Welcome. All right, cool. So, hey, we're going to do a really, really exciting video that will not take 400 hours today.
Yes, it will.
It probably will. Steve, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk about certificates, and more explicitly, we're going to talk about SCEP certificates. So we're going to be leveraging network device enrollment services, and then we're going to be setting up a SCEP server. Awesome. So we have the ability to provision certificates to multiple devices. Yeah. Okay,
cool. So, you know, in layman's terms, we're doing NDES certificate enrollment and configuring that in our environment. Now, before we actually hit record, we all sort of sat around and had a chat about this. There are a myriad ways, for an hour and a half. There are a myriad amount of ways to really get that sort of identity and certificates to really sort of deploy in your environment. NDES is one of those ways. There are a bunch of others. So in saying that, this is going to be part one of a bunch of different videos that will involve, so we're going to do NDES and we're going to explain sort of in other videos how to actually do things with those certificates. And then we will potentially circle back and we'll talk about the other, or we'll definitely circle back and talk about the other options. So things like PKCS. Nick, are there any other options? I've only ever done NDES.
I've only done PKCS.
There we go.
It depends on what you want to choose.
Yeah, cool. So there's definitely
no best
multiple
practice.
Yeah, there is no best practice.
Well, there is a third option for certificate distribution, but we highly don't recommend it for Intune, which is group policy.
Yeah, exactly. Group policy bad. Yeah, hit me up on Twitter if you want my real opinion on group policy. All right, so multiple ways of doing this. We're going to do that over a bunch of different videos. So that's the intro out of the way. So on this video, we're going to go through and we're going to set up NDES from basically 0 to 100. We've sort of pre-baked this a little bit because there's a bunch of stuff that's not really fun to show on a YouTube video. But essentially, Steve, what have we actually already done to sort of pre-get our environment ready?
Cool. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and I'll show you what I've set up in the environment.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to go here, share my computer. Let me just change my computer around a little bit. So what I've got set up is a domain controller, which is connecting to AAD via an AAD Connect, obviously, as it does everything that we need on that front for the identity sync. Once we've got that sync in place, we've then got our certificate authority. That's been set up as a root certificate in the enterprise. So it's connected to our Active Directory and publishing into our Active Directory. So we have that certificate across our domain. And then the last server that we have set up is our network device enrollment server, or NDES. And that's been set up just with the Active Directory cert services feature. And you'll see up here we have the yellow exclamation mark saying that we still need to configure it.
Nice.
All of the features that we've enabled and turned on are available in the docs that we'll have down below. And that's super important to stress. The docs are fantastic. They've been improved a lot over the last 4 years since we started doing network device enrollment services and SCEP policies all those years ago, Ben.
Yeah, don't remind me.
Yeah. There's also some really fantastic community documentation around how to do this. There's scripts, there's myriad of different ways to actually provision it, but we're just going to go through and step through the process of provisioning it as it is, because that's going to match what we need.
Yeah, and I mean we've got a little fun little internal joke here that like our videos could really be boiled down to just putting on some nice music and reading the docs, but like literally with NDES, following along with those documentations that Microsoft have provided is invaluable. We're literally going to be building from that right now. So, you know, again, we'll have the link down below, but like if you've never done this before, read the documents, follow them, don't miss any steps, because there is a lot to this. It is very complex. So we apologize in advance, but let's just go through, we'll get through the process and we'll show you how to do it. Hopefully this will help you out.
Yeah. And look, while Ben says it's complex, the reason why it's complex is it's very concise.
Yes. Yeah.
And
There's
it has
a lot
to be
of
concise.
there's a lot of very specific parts that need to be done, not necessarily in a specific order, but there's a lot of steps, and you just need to make sure that you do them all. That's the most complicated part, is just making sure you can read the thing properly.
Correct.
Cool. So let's do it.
So what I'm going to do is I'll obviously be driving today, and both Nick and Ben are going to be yelling out at me of what we need to set up, because I don't remember, and we figure it's going to be more entertaining than me sitting here and stepping through the docs.
It's a live demo.
That's right.
Exactly. Now, have you paid the demo gods?
I have
sacrifice? Not. Okay.
Myself.
Great. Yeah, exactly.
Slip me the money.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, great. So on my run sheet notes, Steve, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the certificate templates in our CA.
Cool. So we're on our certificate authority here, and you can see that we now go across. Actually, let's start off very simply. We're going to go to start, and then we're going to go to certificate authority. It's going to load up. Make sure that you've got the green tick there, like mine does. When I went in there before, it was black, which meant that it was offline and not running, which was bad. So we're going in here and we're creating our certificate template. From here, we're going to now go to manage. And what that will pop up is a separate screen. And obviously you can load up certificate template console separately, but we're just going to go through that way because it's the better way to do it. And we'll show you why at the end. So you can see here we have a lot more certificates in this list than we do in this list. And these are templates, to be very clear. And that's because they need to be published and made available, but by default they're not. So let's talk about which certificate we start off with here, Ben.
That's a very good question, and it is not written down. We can start with the SCEP template.
Yeah. So let's start with the. Are we going to start with the user template, or are we going to start with the web server template?
I was going to say user.
Yeah, let's do user.
Because we use the same user for a device certificate and a user certificate, right? In Intune.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that comes down to key usage, which we'll talk through.
The client certificate, you can use this template.
Yep. So just for those playing along at home, what I've gone here and done is right-clicked on user and gone to duplicate template. This is actually pretty important, making sure your certificate authority options are set correctly. In this environment, we're starting off at 2003. Realistically, you should be putting it to at least 2012 R2. What that means is it'll add and remove a couple of features to the options. Cool. And that just means the certificate authority is a minimum of 2012 R2. And then the last one here is we want to make sure that we're targeting Windows 10 because it adds all of these additional security components. Is it mandatory? No, you can leave it as the defaults, but this is where, in that scenario, it's going to make your life easier down the track.
Do you lose anything if you change that certificate recipient, or you just gain things?
I believe you may lose some things that have been deprecated or that have been uploaded.
But that's just for older stuff that we don't care about. Yeah.
That's right. So if you've got an older networking appliance that you're connecting to, or an older application that may need specific configurations for those certificates, that may well be factored into that conversation. But for what we're doing in our environment, we are 2016 and above, we are Windows 10 and above, and realistically for our certificate authority, we could even go to 2016. Cool. This is where if you've got multiple certificate authorities in your environment, you can have multiple different templates onto different certificate authorities. And if your certificate authority is below 2016, you won't see that certificate template.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a bit of fun. We then go to general. And this is super important. Make sure we set a name here. So we're going to set this as NDES user. Don't put spaces. From my experience, you run into problems if you put spaces and it gets really confusing.
Treat it
when you're going and putting into registry keys.
Yeah. The names change if you get spaces, don't they?
Correct. So if I put a space here, you'll note that the template name doesn't actually have a space there.
And then if you use that template name, you'll get an error.
Yes.
My guiding principle with any of this stuff is treat it like it's a Linux box. Don't put servers, don't put spaces on anything, and then you'll be fine.
Yep. And Fun note, if you do it via PowerShell or command line, command line to import into Active Directory to create the template, you can put spaces in the template name and it causes a whole heap of problems in your environment.
Yep.
So don't do that either.
Don't do that. Okay, cool.
Are we publishing it into Active Directory, Ben? I can't remember. Do we need to? I don't think we need.
We definitely need to publish something, but publish certificate templates. I don't know.
No. We'll go with no.
Let's go with no.
We can leave it in there or not. So this comes down to when you're doing the request, whether it's going to tie the certificate to the user in Active Directory.
Yeah.
Realistically,
I don't remember ever having
via NDES, it's not going to do that.
Yeah.
Request handling, we're not going to touch anything there. We don't need to change it. Cryptography, make sure it's 2048, and this will be a running theme throughout the whole implementation. And when we're talking about certificates of authorities, make sure that you're using 2048 as the default. It causes problems if you go above that for things like Windows Hello for Business and some network appliances and things like that.
Because they can't handle the size of it.
Correct. Sure. It's fun.
Mm.
I thought that should be key store provider. No, that's correct. Don't mind me. I'm just double checking my work here.
Very good.
CAD testation, we're not going to touch that. We don't need to do it. We don't have it set up in this environment. Superseding of templates. Again, for this scenario, it's not needed, but in other scenarios, it's actually pretty awesome. Here's where we're going into these extensions. So this is where we're talking around our key usage and our application policies. So right now you can see our application policies are encrypted file system, secure email, and client authentication. Super important that you make a note of what you've put in here, because that then impacts when you're creating profiles for Wi-Fi and VPN at a later date, because it's looking in your policy, and we'll go deeper into it further.
Yeah. They essentially need to match. So when you're creating your profiles, again, which we'll do in another video, they need to match exactly what you set up here. So if you have more, you just need to be aware of that and make a note. Yeah.
So what I would normally add here, because I'm lazy, is I'd also add any purpose. Because then I don't need to worry about it. I can say you can use that certificate for whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah, sure.
It's your identity. Do what you need to do.
Yep.
I'm sure security people are sitting there and going, "Oh my God, Steve, do not do that." But
demo environment. Yeah,
just did.
We can then step into our basic constructs. Yep. All this sort of stuff we don't need to change. Where's the last one, which is
subject name, is it?
Subject name is going to build from Active Directory. No, we want to supply on request.
Supply on request.
Have I got everything right so far, Ben?
Yes, subject name is supply and request. And then for the extensions, the thing that the document, again, linked below, the only thing that it states around the application policies that we were looking at is the only thing that is actually important there is the client authentication.
Yep.
So that is the only requirement. Everything else can be stripped off. So security guys that are freaking out that we just selected any purpose, don't worry. The only thing you actually need is client authentication.
Correct. And the thing to note on that is, and this is what Nick was referring to earlier, is we could go here and add. And if we go and add workstation, I think it is, or is it server? Server authentication.
Yeah.
Server authentication gives you computer level authentication as well.
Yeah.
But again, you then have to have that in your list of attributes when you create the profile.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to leave it at that with those four. I don't think there's anything else we need to add. Or
can you go back to request handling?
Yep, request handling.
Do we need that allow private key to be exported? Because I think that's only for the PKCS.
That's correct.
That's one of the differences that you need that selected for the PKCS, but with the NDES you don't.
Yeah, for
sure. That pros and cons. So
nice. What I'll actually do though is I'll leave that selected, so then we can use the same template for both PKCS and NDES. Because in our lab environment it doesn't really matter, but for SCEP there's no requirement to export the private key. And if you talk to the security teams, they'll probably sit there and go, yes, please don't make the private key exportable because it's a security thing.
Yeah.
So it's a bigger conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
So let's go, and we've created our template, which is now going to be called NDES user.
Cool.
And I believe we need to create one for the web server, correct, Ben?
Yes, that's correct.
So if we go here and duplicate, and I've just grabbed the web server certificate for those playing along at home. I'm going to give it a name of NDES server. Anything special I need to do with this, Ben?
I'm just checking. This is actually surprisingly a little bit more. The docs could be a little bit better. Yeah. No, I can't see anything blatantly obvious here. Because this is not the SCEP certificate template, is it? This is just the web one.
This is the web server one.
Okay. I don't know. I don't see any significant information unless.
I think from a security point of view, we just need to add NDES user, don't we? Or is that on the user certificate that we just created?
I think that might be on the user one.
Okay.
Okay. So now the next step that we need to do. So we've created the NDES user certificate and we've created the. So let's be very clear here, because if you're following along with the documentation, it can be a little confusing. The NDES user certificate is our SCEP certificate.
Template.
The NDES template. Thank you. The NDES server certificate, which is, or template, is our web certificate, which is, we could, in theory, we could use the generic general one that comes with IIS, but we've created our own. That's all fine. So the next step that we need to do is we need to create a service account, and we need to link that that service account back into the NDES user cert, or the SCEP cert that we've just created. So Steve's going to go ahead and create that service account now.
So the important thing to note with this account is it needs to be a standard domain account, not anything special.
Mm-hmm.
Okay then.
Have you already created this, Steve?
Oh, I have. Because I've already set
prepared.
this up. So here's the account that I've created previously.
Nice.
The reason why it's still there is because I have gone through and mocked this up in the environment and then recreate it. You'll note that it's just a domain user account. There's nothing special with the account itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to close that out, and we're going to go back to our certificate authority. And when we go to our template here, we're going to go properties on the NDES user one, and then we're going to add, and we're going to go SVC NDES. Obviously, use whatever your naming principle is for certificate for service accounts, and we're going to select enroll. I believe it is, Ben.
Yeah, that's correct. Enroll. We don't want to do auto enroll. We just want to do read and enroll. That's correct. Yes.
Awesome. So now we're going to go OK, and the next step is we need to make those certificates available on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go and request, you can see them. So if we go here and we're going to right click on certificate template, go to new certificate template to issue, and you'll see that we have a list of certificates here. If you don't see it, close out of your CA and open it back up. Yeah, that's the best I can give you. Mm-hmm. So click OK on those two that we've added, which is the NDES server and the NDES user. And we're going to click OK, and they'll appear in the list now. So we now have those certificates there. Oh, certificate templates there. So what's the next thing?
So let me have a look here. So we've just created the templates.
Yep.
We've granted permission for cert revocation.
We have not.
We have not. Shall we do that?
Yes.
Very good.
So what do we do for that? Does it right click on the...
Yep. So we're just right clicking on the cert authority console.
Yep.
Going into properties. We're going into security.
Security.
And we're clicking add.
Add. And this is just the service account as well, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And we've added that. And what we're going to do here is issue and manage certificates.
Yeah, issue and manage certificates is pretty much the only thing. Yeah.
Cool. Obviously, if you're doing this, you need to make sure that the username and password for your service account is robust and well maintained, because this gives you a lot of authority to your certificate authority. and all the security associated with that. Certificates are important. Don't get lulled into a false sense of security.
That's correct. Just while we're doing that, so feel free to close that off. That's done. Because you've already pre-created that service account.
Yes.
Have you already added that security group to the magical group that it needs to be a member of?
No, I have not.
Okay, cool. So let's
So that's on the NDES server itself, which is the iUser.
Oh, sure. So we'll worry about that in a second. So ignore. Okay, cool. The next step then, so we've granted permission so that we can enroll and revoke those certs. We now need to modify the validity period of the certificate template.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, if we're following the
where we
guidance. So after we create the SCEP certificate template, we can edit the template to review the validity period on the general tab. We probably don't need to do this.
Are we going to set that in the Intune policy anyway?
That's
So validity period is super important, but for our environment, realistically, we could set this to 1 day and it doesn't matter.
So and in a real world scenario, so this is where the documents is actually really important. And if we're going back to that fun little best practice conversation that we were having, where there is no such thing as best practice, the best practice is to plan to use a validity period of 5 days or greater in your production environment.
Yep.
That's pretty much all it says. It says when the validity period is less than 5 days, there's a high likelihood of that certificate ending a near expiry or expired state more often, which, I mean, that makes sense, right? You're literally lowering the period. So if a device doesn't, phone home for a couple of days, you could be in trouble and they're going to have authentication problems. So just be aware of that. It's definitely not something we need to do right now, but 5 days or more and you're golden.
Yeah, and remember, if you're going to use the 20% renew cycle, that's where 5 days means that you have 4 days of life for the certificate, and it's going to cause you problems.
That's cool.
If you've got a long weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do this on a Friday, folks. All right, so
or do it.
Or do it on a Friday and then go on holidays. Yeah, jump on a plane.
Yeah, nobody's ever done that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. So I think we've done the templates. I think that's everything we need to do. So the next step is to pop over to the NDES box.
Yep.
We're going to start installing some things.
So first off, what we'll do is we'll add that service account to the iUser group.
Yes, that is the group that I was trying to be coy about.
Yeah. So what this is the in IIS, there is a group that gets created as your interactive user account, and it has the ability to work on behalf of.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a member of this group here.
Yeah.
And that's the only permission that the service account needs.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
This is a limited account. If you don't need to give it admin to the NDES server, you don't need to have domain admin for the account, you don't need enterprise admin for the account, you just need that permission. If you give it more permission than it's supposed to have, it makes your environment a little less secure.
Because this is a very dangerous service account that we're creating, which is the point. It's it does a very specific thing, but it should do nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I don't know whether I was falling asleep or not because certificates are so much fun, but did we publish the certificate templates?
Yes.
Okay, cool. There we go. I was falling asleep.
So this is where you'll see them here as NDES user and NDES server sitting under certificate templates on the certificate authority itself.
Yep.
What you can also do to validate that, this is just, you have that methodology to understand what's going on, is if we go to run and we go cert lm.msc and we pop that up, what we should see is when we go to certificates and go request a new certificate,
we should be able to see those.
You should see the web server one, but you're not for some reason.
Sure.
Do we publish that to Active Directory? Was that setting?
That may well be the issue. Or we don't.
If you don't have permission, you should.
No, there's NDES server and NDES user.
So you'll see here it's not there. If you see this in your environment, what that means is you probably don't have the trusted root, which you do.
Or it's the user permission, isn't it? You need read and enroll.
Yeah.
For your user account that's running cert LM.
My environment might be a little bit broken.
I think just add your user account, that should.
Authenticated users have read.
What about enroll?
Server needs to have workstation, but let's do this. What we're going to do is we're going to put in our IT NDES server, and it needs to have the permission to request the certificate.
Sure. Oh, yes, I remember getting stuck on this once.
Yep. So the reason why the computer object, even though you're running as an admin account, the computer object is actually doing the request at that screen that we're in. So if we now go here and we go all new request, go next, what should happen is there it is there.
So that's the computer account
That's the computer account making the request, not the user account.
But if you ran SCEP MGR to MSA and use the context, that would use a user account rather than.
That's correct. So if we go here and go cert mgr.msc.
Cert LM is one of those hidden great.
Yes.
Yeah, I use cert LM all the time.
And if we go request new certificate, what we should also see in here is more, and you've got the NDES user one, but not the NDES server one
because we don't have permission. Yeah, for sure. Cool.
So that's just how that works for people playing along at home.
That's good to know for testing as well, for permissions.
Aren't certificates fun?
Yes, they are.
Okay, cool. So certificates look like they're good. So the process now is we're on the NDES box, and we're gonna set up some services, and we're gonna do all that fun stuff.
Correct. So this is where we're going to step through the process that is setting up NDES. There's some automation you can do around this, but you don't have any problem doing it, but anyway, we'll go through that. So what you'll see here is this explains where you need to have enterprise admin. So the account that we're adding here or using for that enrollment needs to be an enterprise admin, not the account that's signed into the computer and not the account that's going to be running the process. It's just the one that's been set here. So you can go in and have your non-interactive admin account and just hit change and add that in as required. And you'll note that that's where you see that network device enrollment service, which is what we're configuring now, needs to have the enterprise admin. So super important. And obviously, if you're a domain admin, you have the ability to elevate into the enterprise admin. And then after you've completed the work, remove your account from that group. Don't leave it in there.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that we've got on in big exclamation marks on our notes here with the enterprise admin stuff. I think what a lot of people do when they get through to this process is they think that they're doing the smart thing by just giving enterprise admin to the NDES service account that they've created, because we're just going to use this one service account for everything with NDES. Don't do that, because you don't want that service account to have enterprise admin access. It's, as I said before, it's a very dangerous account that we've created. So we don't want it to have access. It's as minimal access as possible.
Correct.
Cool.
And this is where we've got that service account that we're talking about earlier. And you'll see that it must be a member of the domain, and it must be in that IIS iUser group. It will throw errors if you don't have it in that group.
The password expires for that account. Can we come back into this?
That's a great question.
Or have you run into that issue?
Yes, we have.
And what did you do?
When the password and or certificate expires for NDES, what I personally recommend is just go and reinstall it.
Yeah, basically rebuild the process. This also comes into play if a good-natured support agent resets the service account password.
Yeah,
accidentally.
So you can technically go in and change the SVC or the service account password in IIS and update it in there and where it's stored.
Yeah.
And it will work. When the certificate itself expires for the NDES object, you need to go and do some changes in the registry, and there's good documentation on it now. I know when Ben and I went through it 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it was a little interesting, but it's a lot better than what it was.
Yeah, it's good to set a reminder if that password does expire.
Yes.
Or it expires to get ready.
Yes.
for people not receiving your certificates.
Yeah, you'll forget. Don't worry. No,
Yeah.
everything will fall apart, and you'll forget what's going on. So
People will stop having certificates on their computers, and they will tell you very rapidly that your password and certificate has expired.
that is correct.
So here is the interesting one. We have the ability of putting CA name or computer name. We're going to select CA name, and we're going to go select, and you'll see that we've got our fancy Intune training CA. Because I decided to name it nicely for once instead of computer name dash CA dash ars, whatever it is.
But naming's not important, Steve.
Correct. I even named the server correctly too. Wow.
Very good.
So this is also important here. Give it a nice name, friendly. It doesn't need to be the defaults. Can be, but why? So we're just going to call it Intune training.
Intaining.
Yeah, intaining. Part of the reason why you may want to name this is if you have multiple network device enrollment services in your environment for a myriad of reasons. And we can step through that once we get to the next stage. I think that's the minimum you have to put in there.
Yeah.
And then we step into our configured CSPs for the RA. Leave it as the default, 2048. 2048 across your whole environment, unless you have a legislative mandate on changing it to a more encrypted level.
Value, yeah.
2048 is more than enough today in 2021.
Yeah.
It may change in the future, but right now, 2048 is the highest you need to go. If you go beyond that, you're going to run into issues with things like Windows Hello for Business and some other authentication protocols.
Yeah.
Because they don't support that larger key. So just calling that out, make sure you leave it as the defaults. You don't need to change it.
But if you do, and to be devil's advocate here, if you do need to change that, make sure it's the same value across the board.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, at the start when we were doing this,
yeah,
wherever there's a value that's 2048 and you need to change it there.
Yes.
Cool.
Exactly. So we've gone and created it. We're now going to hit configure, and we're going to sacrifice to the demo gods and hope this completes successfully, because this will go through and do this. So while that's going through that process, let's talk about why you may have multiple NDES environments or NDES servers in your environment. So say, for example, you've got a prod and a non-prod, and they both need to connect to your Wi-Fi. What you need to set up there from an AA, and they're separate AAD environments, you need to have a separate NDES server or a separate PKCS server for each environment. And the reason for that is it's there for it's the one that's issuing the certificates, and we'll go into that when we install the Intune connector. So the next part that we're going to quickly do, and because I don't want to fat finger it, is I'm going to copy the set SPN, and we're going to make it so we can go and put that service principal name in for the NDES server itself, as well as my account or my service account.
While you're doing that, Steve, and because I know you're really good at multitasking, can you explain to me what this actual process does? So, what is set SPN?
So basically, it's registering a service principal name in Active Directory to say if the service account is authenticating from itndes.intune.training, it's all happy days on HTTP.
Gotcha.
So it's a trust sort of thing. It's a service account scenario
to
say, yep, this is a service principal that we're trusting for this user account.
Do you need to do, and I didn't see your little cheat sheet notepad file just before, do you need to also do the HTTPS?
No.
Okay.
It's only for HTTP because it's internal traffic.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. Yep.
Where you may have seen this previously is when you're talking about SQL for things like config manager. So when you're setting up SQL for config manager, you need to do the set SPN for the config manager instance to say the SVC CM account has permission to go and do this task.
Gotcha. So it's essentially creating like a hole in a proxy or a firewall or whatever, but only if Like it only allows if that user is going through through that protocol.
Yeah,
cool.
And it's in the identity component.
Yeah, cool. I've never understood it. I've just always done it. Like it's part of the process. So cool. Correct. Thank you.
Well, Steve, when you were going back to about the multiple NDES servers, so if someone already has an NDES server in their environment and they want to build out Intune with this certificates, would you recommend that they install a new NDES specifically for this Intune connector?
And the reason why is because the Intune connector breaks.
If it's being used by something. Exactly,
and you'll see that when we get to the end, hopefully.
Yeah, it full on locks everything down, right?
Yeah, it changes it. It returns a 503 error, which is typically an internal system error on the NDES server once you install the connector, because you need to be connecting with a certain process or protocol.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's pretty brutal in how it locks it down, and that's because it's being made publicly available via the reverse proxy of some sort.
It's a pretty cool piece of information for the viewers.
It is, yeah.
Don't break stuff. That's not best practice.
No, well, let's be honest.
That's one best practice.
It's a practice.
You're going to break stuff. Just acknowledge it. Just understand that this is how you get around it and how you step around it. And so you don't get yelled at and have a resume generating event.
Exactly. It's Intune training. Embrace chaos.
Yes. So we've now set up our NDES server, and if we hit close, we're all happy days. The next part that we're going to quickly do, just to validate that everything worked correctly, is I'm going to open up Edge, and I'm going to get Ben to paste in the chat the link for me, because I can never remember it, which is localhost
the full
cert SRV /MS
mscep/mscep.dll.
So you'll see that it's now popped up the network device enrollment service, and this is where we can go and use do stuff. We can go and hit the admin protocol, and you can see that it's coming up and it's saying it's not secure because we don't have a certificate on there. And this is where we need to have that web server to put that link on there.
Cool.
So let's go and quickly
if someone doesn't get that site, is there something you particularly know that they've gone wrong?
Yes, I've seen a lot of companies miss this step.
But so what would be like, so, okay, they go to that site and it doesn't come up. What is the first thing that you would actually go and have a look at? Or what would you do to troubleshoot that?
Yeah, I'd definitely look at the service account. I'd also go and look at the IIS log. So most important for most organizations, or whenever you're doing anything on IIS, go and look at the IIS logs. There's always going to be
might not be a member of that local group.
That's correct. Although you get prompted now in 2016 and above, which is nice.
Yeah.
Before that, it was you didn't get any messages. So not a member of that group. If you haven't set SPN, it may fail. You've screwed around with your certificate. Actually, no, the certificate encryption, that's not going to throw an error at that point.
No.
It's probably going to render most times. If you've got a hardened IIS, hardened web browser, it's going to fail. The other thing to note is in the docs, and we'll definitely have the links for the docs below, there's a couple of additional components that you have to install, which is the ASP.NET activation for .NET 3.5 and .NET 4.7. They both have to be enabled. They don't get enabled by default when you enable the Network Device Enrollment Services option under the Certificate Authority. It would be nice if they did, but they don't, and that's how you get around it.
Sweet.
Cool. And this is the logs here, as we've discussed. If you've done Config Manager for any period of time, you'd know how these work. And you can see we're connecting on port 80, and all the way at the end we have our 200. We actually have a 404 because it's not finding it for some reason, but it's all good.
Be fine.
It's not failing, so that's the important part.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's rendering the page. We're all happy days. So the next part that we're going to do is we're going to quickly set up the certificate on the IIS server, because we want to make it secure. We always want to be secure. And I'm just going to go to my cert LM up top. We're in our personal store. and we're going to go and request our certificate. There's two things to note here, and this is updated guidance based on the documentation. Previously, the guidance was you need to have your reverse proxy address in here as well as part of the subject alternate name. If you're using AAD app proxy, we almost called it AAD Connect, but if it's AAD app proxy,
very different.
Yes, they are. It just shows what I've been talking about a lot more. But if you're using the app proxy, you don't need to put the app proxy address as the subject alternate name because it's doing the translation to the on-prem for you. So
and this is real, like new, like we were going through the docs and we noticed that before we started recording.
So we're going to give it a common name, which is ITNDES .intune training.ad. I'm just going to copy that and we're going to add it. And then under here, we're going to add our DNS.
Yeah.
And because, actually, I don't want to undo DNS. We want it under the common name as well. We're just going to put ITNDES, just so you can use a short name if you want.
Sure, sure.
It's not important, but it gives you that option. If you've got multiple certificate authorities in your environment, this is where you can select which one you want to issue it from. We do know that there's stories going around about where you have multiple CAs depending upon resource and user domains and things like that. Mm-hmm. If you want to screw around with the private key, you can actually go in here and make it exportable when you're issuing the certificate itself. Gotcha. But the minimum that you need to do is set this. And what I'd also highly recommend, just for your usage and your sanity, go in to hit the general tab and type
a friendly name.
A friendly name. Otherwise, you're going to see a string or the serial number of the certificate everywhere you look for it. So we're just going to call this NDES Web Server Cert. And we're going to go OK. Cool. And we're going to enroll it. And we hit finish, and you'll actually see that we've got two other certificates that were created automatically, being this CEP encryption and exchange
enrollment
agent offline requests. Both of those are processed as part of that registration of the feature, and I'm sure Ben's going to explain how awesome they are.
No, I'm not. What I was going to say is this in any way related to the roles that we specified when we were creating the templates? You know how you selected any and we've got the, file encryption and all that sort of stuff? It's not. Okay.
No. So the exchange enrollment agent and the CEP encryption are just the certificates that are required for the network device enrollment service, and they're the default certificates that are available from the CA for those protocols.
Cool.
Technically, you could go and create your own, and you could spin out and make some really crazy things with the templates, but
unnecessary. Yeah, exactly.
You're going to complicate yourself, and you don't need to. And also reissuing those certificates. I'm just going to quickly show you this, and yes, Ben, we're going to go on a tangent, but it's
I love tangents. What are you talking about?
When we go here and select AD, you'll notice that we don't have CEP or Exchange Enrollment Agent there. And even if we scroll here, what you'll see is CEP encryption's there.
Yeah.
But if we keep going down, what you won't see is the Exchange Enrollment.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you will, but you don't have permission for it.
It's
actually being issued to a user object.
Yeah, gotcha.
And if we go across to our CA and select back on our CA, we can see our issued certificates. You'll see here our CEP.
Yeah.
And if we scroll to the right, you'll see that it was issued. Where is it? That doesn't show it. I thought it did. Request a name, that's what we're looking for. You'll see that it was requested by me as my admin account that has the enterprise admin to be able to request those certificates.
Yeah, cool.
That's done in the user object and put into the computer certificate store. So that's why when renewing those certificates becomes
tricky.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you always forget that step. I mean, I know I do.
Yeah, and it's something that it's a matter of having that attention to detail. So we now have our NDES server setup, we have our certificate for making it secure. So we're going to go into IIS and make that website secure.
Yeah.
Once we've completed that, we're going to then just connect to that website. So
just verify, yeah.
The interesting thing here is we don't see our certificate or cert server there, right? It's one of these interesting ones where it's under a virtual application, and you'll see it there. And this is important. We're not going to need to go into it today, but this is important when you're doing troubleshooting down the track. You need to be able to know how to get there. Otherwise, you'll go into IIS and go, oh my God, it doesn't exist. Are we doing something crazy? It's just under a virtual application, so you need to select it through there.
Yeah.
In this scenario, we're just going to edit the bindings on the default website. You'll see that we only have 80 there. We're going to add 443 by selecting the drop-down. And you'll see now we have our friendly name. So this is where it's super important to have the friendly name. Otherwise, you end up with a GUID.
Makes a big difference.
It really does. A lot easier. It really does. And you can sit here, if you've got multiple IPs on the server, you can allocate that out like you would with IIS. But beyond that, that's all you need to do.
Cool.
We're done. And the last thing that I'll call out in here is our SCEP application. And this is where if we go to advanced settings, you'll see our identity being that Intune / SVC NDES account. And that's where you update the username and password if you have a rotating password on there.
Gotcha.
Highly don't recommend it, but we do know organizations out there that have that requirement.
Yeah.
So we now have our certificate authority. Let's go back here to our website. You'll see that it's not secure. We're just going to change this by just doing https:// and it doesn't like it.
You didn't have that name in the certificate, did you?
I thought it did.
IT enders?
Try the FQDN just to see.
Tune train.ad. And I'm getting prompted to authenticate, which is interesting, but that's okay. We're going to leave that. That's expected because we'd not.
But like that cert, right?
No, it liked it. And we're going to go MS SCEP.
.dll. MSCEP, yeah.
.dll. So that's going to work. And if we flick over, and you'll see that that works. So it's just because of how that application processes through. It's not a major concern. And you'll see it saying, I do not have permissions, which is interesting. But that's okay. We're not going to worry about it.
Famous last words.
Yeah, it's all good.
We'll just make a note when things don't work.
So we now have all of that set up, all of that working. The next step that we're going to go into is I'm going to open up my Edge browser and I'm going to go to the portal.azure page. And this is where we're going to set up the... Actually, before we do that, Ben, there's a step that we've missed. We need to go into the registry.
Oh, and we need to add that value. Oh, what is it?
Tell
oh
them
my
which
God.
cert to use in the registry.
Yes, that's correct. So we need to go here. Let's see if I can just copy and paste it. It probably won't work.
You need to... Yeah, that should work.
Yep. And this is where you'll see your 3 certificate templates. And realistically, what you can do here is just go NDES user. Make sure that that matches the certificate template. So this is the one that we're talking about with the spaces.
Yep.
It's the one that doesn't have spaces if you, for some reason, put spaces in there.
Don't put spaces in there. I'm good. I just want to do a video where I just say don't use spaces for an hour and a half.
Yeah. So that's going to give us the NDES user certificates, and that's going to set it all up. So before we go to the next step, what is...
Just to be clear about that name, we'll be using that NDES user certificate for both devices and user certificates.
Correct.
That's
so
correct.
it's not to confuse anyone.
Yes.
So one of the things to note here is you should always, once you've set all of this up, restart the server.
Yep.
Because you will run into issues if you don't. So we're going to restart the server. So we don't forget and then sit there and go, oh my God, something's not working, and try and spin out. Restart the server because it's actually required as part of some of the IIS configuration.
And it is documented that it needs to be rebooted as well. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, restart the server that hosts the NDES servers. Don't use IIS reset. IIS reset does not complete the required changes. So again, this is super important. Reboot is your friend.
Yes.
And hopefully you don't need a cab approval to reboot the server.
If you do, just accidentally lean on the power switch.
Which is good, because we're only using this NDES for our Intune.
Yes.
Yeah.
A shared one that will break everything.
That's right.
That's correct.
Again, to tell everyone.
That's right.
So
Cool.
our server's back up and running. Obviously, I haven't disabled Server Manager on this computer because it's a lab and who cares. We're now going to go and install the AAD app proxy.
So we were having an interesting conversation before we hit record, where sort of Nick was saying, like, obviously we're doing AAD app proxy because it's, you know, if we just drink the Kool-Aid, it all works.
Correct.
Nick, did you want to talk a little bit about alternate options or sort of what can be done if your company doesn't want to use the app proxy?
More the question that we were asking Steve before, if someone, I mean, the documentation goes in detail on how to configure the Microsoft application proxy in Azure, but if someone did want to use F5 or Netscaler or something like that, could they use that? Which
Yes.
the answer is yes, but is that documented by Microsoft? No.
I actually think it is next to the documentation for this one. It says using a third-party web proxy.
So they're not limited to the Azure application proxy.
But the part that I'd stress about that is it's not thoroughly tested. At the end of the day, it just needs to be a reverse proxy that you can route to, and that's what the AAD app proxy is doing for you.
Yeah, for sure.
And it gives you the host name and everything, right? The Azure app proxy. So, in other words, the other person, they'll need a lot more stuff to get it running.
Yeah.
And that proxy is the easiest way.
That's correct. Well, it is the least amount of friction for your environment. So some customers want to sit there, have vanity domains and everything associated. You can put vanity domains on your app proxies, but it might also be that you want to control everything in and out of your network through an F5, a big IP, a Netscaler, checkpoint.
Yeah. So I think I think the important thing to sort of put a pin in that conversation is if your business has dictated that you are not going to use AAD app proxies and that there is a solution that is already in place, there is an assumption that someone knows how that works.
Yes. And
that you just need to integrate that sufficiently.
Correct.
So all we're saying is using AAD app proxy, as Steve said, is the smoothest way to do it, frictionless way, because it's super documented and it's all in the same ecosystem. So, like, to me, it makes sense. But there are obvious scenarios where you would need to use a third-party thing. And hopefully, if you're using a third-party solution, you have an expert that knows how it's been configured in your environment.
The thing to note is you need to make sure there's no authentication on that. That's probably the only call out.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's using, Anyway, we've digressed and ran down that rabbit hole pretty well.
Yeah, we have.
What we've done here is we've now gone to portal.azure. We're in Azure Active Directory, and we've selected Application Proxy. The next step that we've done, and we're just going to ignore the no active connectors because we're going to create a new one and just wouldn't clean up and whatever. We've hit download connector service previously because my internet sucks, so we're doing it pre-downloaded. And you'll see here we have the AAD app proxy connector installer. So we're going to quickly run through installing this. Hit install. Yes, of course, we're going to trust the UAC. We're going to step into this. I'll just take a little bit of time to go through.
Now, Steve, you told me that I should be very excited about a change that has been made to this connector.
Not this one, the next
one.
No,
the Intune. Okay. Well, I'm excited anyway. So
yes. So we're going to quickly sign in here with our global admin. There is you don't need to be global admin to do this. There's certain levels you need to be at. Go and look it up yourself. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Wait, you came in for training?
Yeah. So this will go through. The most important part is that it's got an updater in there now, so it keeps it up to date. You don't have to worry about it. It's just going to work. If you have an outbound proxy, you need to do this. We don't have an outbound proxy, so we're all happy days. This is a very simple lab environment. So we now have an AAD at Proxy. Let's go here. I believe that should be set up. And if we go over here and
refresh,
step off and step back, you'll see that we now have that server there. And hopefully I can remove this one. No, still can't delete it. Don't know why.
I think it removes after
it expires out.
Many days of inactivity.
Cool. So we have our app, and now we're going to create a new one or configure an application. And this is where we're pointing it to an on-prem server. So we're going to call this Intune Training NDES. Actually, let's set it to SCEP, so we're very definitive.
Yeah.
And the internal URL. So this isn't the full long one. What it just needs to be is the fully qualified domain name. https://
server, right?
ndes.intunetraining.ad. We don't need the last part because we add that as when we get into the next step. This is where you can go and select your vanity domain and put it at the end if you want. We're not going to because
there's no point.
We don't. Yeah. Well, if you do, you then have to publish that domain DNS record.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
So we've copied that URL. We're going to just paste it into our little crib sheet here. And we'll use that in a later video.
Hey, I have a question for you, Steve. That pre-authentication flag or drop down, has that always been there?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
The reason why it's AAD by default and you can't change that is because it's AAD has to have HTTPS. But for what we're using today, it needs to be passed through. So previously it was passed through by default. It's now switched to Azure Active Directory.
Okay, so that's why, because I've never really paid attention to it because, it's always passed through.
And that's what you're saying if you use NetScaler or F5 or whatever, you know that pass through.
Yeah, it has to be passed through in the scenario.
Logic applies.
Sure.
Yep. And then here for the external, keep it as HTTPS because it doesn't matter because it's using a public certificate from Microsoft. And your happy days.
Yeah.
No timeout. None of this you need to worry about. Just leave it as the default.
Cool.
We're here to add, and that's going to go through the process of adding it, which won't take too long. Cool. So now it's completed the Azure Active Directory app proxy. It allows us to connect to it. So if we go and copy this, we should be able to go and hit that link and paste it in there, and it should get an IIS error. Admin page.
Yeah.
And there you go. And if we then go /cert svr/mscp/mscep.dll, because I spelt server wrong because RV, not VR. You'll catch that quite often, but that's how it works.
Yeah.
So you can see that we're using an external address and it's now routing internally. So it's all happy days and it does everything we expect. And the thing to note is when we look at the certificate here, it's still going to be that public certificate. It's not going to be our internal one. So,
we could spend a really long time talking about the implied fears of having this publicly open. Let's not do that because I think that could actually be a really good video to have a bunch of people on to sort of quell those fears. But suffice to say is that this needs to be publicly accessible. Otherwise, we literally cannot grab the certificate. I don't believe there's any real security implication involved here because we're not deploying the certificate to anyone. It needs to be trusted.
Yeah. So right now, technically, any device can connect to this and request a certificate, so long as they know how to correctly form the request. The next step that we're going to step through is the part that makes it so it's secure.
Exactly.
And that's the important thing to know.
Certificate, though, if someone's using, the F5 or NetScaler, they'd either need an existing wildcard certificate of their own or to purchase another one with the SAN. So at least with the benefit is we're getting that certificate without having to buy one or use an existing one.
Yeah,
that's good. That's very much,
Okay.
So the next step we're going to go through is we're going to go and install our Intune certificate connector.
This is the one that I'm excited about.
So the one thing I'm going to stress is make sure you right-click and run as administrator.
Mm-hmm.
The number of times, at least on the old version, that you'd go double click on it, step you all the way through, and then it would fail. And it wouldn't tell you why it's failing, and it was because it didn't have admin privileges and it didn't request for them. So I think it got fixed with this version, but for me, I've been doing it a few times, so I just now right click and run administrator on the Intune connector because I definitely want it running as administrator.
Yeah.
And we're going to accept the EULA, and it's going to step through. It's a lot more streamlined than what it was previously.
It used to be a real pain because this is always the last step that you do. So everyone watching, we're almost finished.
Yes.
But yeah, this always used to be a pain, and it was the last thing you had to do, and it's really used to remove any will to continue.
Correct. So we've got that set up, and it's completed successfully. Now we're going to go configure now.
And that's the same connector that we use for PKCS and SCEP now.
Correct.
The new change by Microsoft.
Yep.
Awesome.
It's always been the same connector. You just selected it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Different links in there.
Full screen this VM because, and of course it didn't. And now you can see that that's there. Fantastic, right? So this is where it's designed to run in a 1080p screen as a minimum, but today we're in a little letterbox. So we're going to go next. And you can see here by default it now goes and selects PKCS. But we're going to disable that. We can leave on certificate revocation, and we're going to tick SCEP. So more and more often you'll see that you should use PKCS, but for Ben and myself, we started using Intune before PKCS was fully supported with Wi-Fi and VPN, so that's what we know. Whereas Nick's all across the PKCS stuff because he came into the party a little bit later. And you'll see here we've got links on how to get more information about it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen this one before. Is that new?
No, that's the old way of. That's when you use that same, like a PFX, isn't it? We use that one certificate for multiple.
Yep,
which I've never used it ever.
No, neither.
I don't think there's much of a
and then certificate revocation. This is actually pretty new.
You did
you set that up on your CA? Is that already set up?
Yeah,
the CRL.
The CRL is not public at the moment.
Okay, but that's the same one you would use for hybrid key trust or something for Hello for Business.
That's correct, and we will
set that
retackle Windows Hello for Business hybrid key trust a third time.
Is this a prerequisite for SCEP, the CRL certificate revocation?
So there's certificate revocation list, which is the CRL that we're talking about.
Should have it though.
Isn't a prerequisite, but yes, add it. And that's the same with the certificate revocation. So this certificate revocation gives you the ability from the Intune portal to right-click on a certificate and revoke it and say it's no longer active on your environment.
Yeah.
The minimum requirement is to have the service account permission on the certificate authority to manage your certificates.
Which is what we set up earlier.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's the only reason why you need to add that. And it's new-ish, so some of the older documentation you'll see won't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Also, this portal or this UI is new, which is awesome.
So it looks different. It looks nice.
Yeah.
Compared to the old one. A lot more options.
Correct. So now you have the option to set up whether it's going to run a system account or whether it's going to run a domain account. Honestly, what I need, system. The reason why you may want to have running as a domain account is for this page here, where you need to route it via a proxy.
Yeah.
But in our scenario, we don't have a proxy, thankfully. And you'll see that it now goes and completes.
This is awesome.
A prereq check. Yeah.
So we used to have to do this. Which there was a PowerShell script that existed that would go and right. Well, of course it still is. It's the internet. Everything exists. Yeah. But yeah, we used to, like, as I said, like, this used to be the biggest pain, and it was the last thing, and it'd be 5 p.m. and you just wanted to go home.
Yep.
And this didn't work. So you go through the process, it'd fail, and then you need to find this script that you saved the link somewhere.
Which is in the Intune samples for MS Graph.
Yes, it is. Yes, 100%. But now it's all included. This is awesome.
And that will go through and check to make sure all your IIS configuration and everything's perfect. And you'll see that it's making sure that NDES is configured, which is
is almost unfair.
Yeah.
All the years that I had to deal with all of this.
How well does it work? Do you know the prerequisite checks?
I believe it works well. I've done
Yeah.
this twice. This is the second time.
Yeah, cool.
So the other nice thing now is you can go and select other Azure clouds if you need to. The one that I note that's not there is the one for Germany, but that's a bigger can of worms that we don't know much about because we're in Australia and we haven't really dug into. But you've got the 3 clouds there, and now we can sign in. And this is going to be with my admin account. So this is the pain point that we used to face with the old version. You had to have a license associated with this account because it was still using the old Silverlight portal. It's still using IE for its authentication engine, which isn't an issue. That's because of how it's baked into the OS. But you'll see now it comes back and says that it's signed in successfully.
That's cool.
And then we just go configure. So the one thing you'll note, Ben, as well, and this is us reminiscing as much as why it's so much easier, is you didn't get asked for which certificate you want to use, right? Because it now just uses the certificate that's on the IIS site.
Yeah, so it's more obvious.
Intuitive.
It's self-referencing the environment or reflecting. Yeah.
So this uses the web server certificate that you configured in IIS.
Correct.
But then in the registry, we configured the actual client certificate.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. So now we hit exit and it will go through and set itself up. And I'm just going to quickly change this back to what it was, being properties, remote desktop settings.
You had it inherit, but that's fine.
I will fix that up later. And there we go. So we're now back here. And if we go back and refresh this page and hit enter, same link, but it's now coming back as a 403 forbidden because we're not allowed to. Only certain user objects are allowed to do that connection now, and that's intentional.
And this was
because we put that servers account in that configuration.
No,
how did this change?
This is part of the when you install the Intune certificate connector, it breaks NDES.
Okay.
Intentionally breaks it.
To make it secure.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Just goes through the setup wizard, finish it, and then
so for the server configuration, we're done.
So don't be alarmed if you test that and it doesn't work. It's working as expected.
Correct.
Yeah. So and this is why installing the Intune certificate connector is the last thing to do, because it technically makes it look like it is now broken. But this circles back to that conversation that I touched on. And again, I don't want to get too into the weeds in this, but I've heard from many people that they're concerned, or their security team is concerned, that we've now got this server that has a publicly facing IIS instance, and you can grab that URL and you're still going to see like the IIS performer screen.
But you can't do anything with it.
You can't do anything with it, but obviously there are still security concerns that it's. Yeah, but the benefit, the thing to point out is that once you finish all of the steps, which again finishes with the Intune certificate connector, is that you now cannot access this unless you are implicitly allowed to. So I think it's enough, but I'm also not your security team. So
but that proxy is only designed to be an outbound connection. That's how Microsoft would design it, right? So it's only an outbound connection. So there's no
That's a reverse proxy.
Yeah.
So it handles that. So the one thing that we didn't note is where we got the Intune certificate connector from and the downloads and all of that.
Yeah.
So how we get there in the MeMac portal is we go to tenant admin and we select connectors and tokens. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see certificate connectors. And all we completed earlier, it comes back to my internet sucks, is we hit add. And then we hit this certificate connector blue text here to download it.
It just downloads it,
What I find useful there is you can click those 3 dots and change the friendly name to be the certificate server that you've installed it on. So if you didn't
know that.
You could, unless
No.
Maybe you can click on it and then you can change it. Yeah, see the name just there.
Cool.
Yeah, so
do this.
I've had an example of a previous issue where we had multiple certificate connectors, different forests and blah, blah, blah. And we turn one off, but obviously it still appears in the portal. And we're trying to work out or which server do we install them on. So
This
once you have more, go in there,
yeah.
edit the name, and then have the server name, because then it's going to it's a bit like the friendly name of that certificate that you showed before. It's going to make your life easier.
Exactly. That's absolutely fantastic.
It's definitely not something I knew that you could do. So hey, even I'm learning.
I'll click the 3 dots like I remembered, which is wrong, which I think is the delete option. But
don't delete.
Actually go into it and then change the name, and that will save you some stuff to when you want it. Because if you want to find that server again, then you're gonna have
and that is a real concern or a real issue that I've seen in a lot of customer environments.
One has installed it and I've forgotten.
Yeah, and then you have to go hunting through documentation that exists totally.
And I've hopefully done. Yeah.
Yep. And obviously, one option you can do is you can go in and look at the app proxy details, but getting to that can be not the most easiest.
You might have installed that in a different server as well, even.
Yeah. Well, no, because if you go here to your app proxy configuration or your app registration,
there's name.
Yeah, the pointer.
Yeah.
Under enterprise applications.
Yeah.
And this is probably an important one to note, actually, is to find the AAD app proxy that we created earlier, you go to enterprise applications and then application proxy.
Yeah. So do we need to install that?
Oh, it goes there as well.
Connector on the actual NDES server? Or could that have been a separate server? It
has to be on the NDES server.
Okay, that's a good point.
And that's why it's doing the check.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Nice. Well, Steve, I think we're done.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, so for everyone that made it from the start to the finish,
congratulations.
This is a brutal process, and it's something that we've been putting off for quite a long time to really discuss because there are so many steps involved. It is difficult to find the right way to talk about this sort of stuff. So hopefully this has been helpful. Again, this is just one of many videos that we're going to do on this process. If you're asking yourself, why do I even need to do this sort of stuff? There may be we'll definitely try and have just a very informal discussion around the importance of certificates in Intune. But just understand that at the end of the day, there is no getting away from certificates.
You will need them eventually.
Just
keep putting it off, and you'll need it.
Exactly. In a zero trust networking environment, which is the gold standard of how you're going to be doing your Intune environments, certificates are the key. They are the thing that literally gets you proof of identity. So
correct.
It's just a thing that you need. Don't avoid it. Go back through, watch this video, read the documents. If you do have any questions, reach out to us because this stuff is painful. But once you've done it a couple of times, it does become sort of fairly sort of common. You can do a little bit while you're asleep.
What I'd also say is most of the MVPs in the community have a good knowledge of this as well because it is such an important thing. So don't just reach out to Ben and myself. Reach out to everybody, all of the Microsoft MVPs for Intune
on Twitter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's all very approachable about it. They're very, very interested in helping out.
We will groan when you bring up certificates because they are painful, but we've done it and we're happy to help because this stuff should be to the point that it's not a groaning situation, right? It's got to get to like the common standard where everyone just goes, oh, it's certificates. It's fine. We can do that.
That's right.
This is one method. You can use the other PKCS method if you like,
correct,
which doesn't require the NDES and it is faster to set up. It depends on what there's advantages, disadvantages of both.
Yeah.
Whichever one you like, you can choose.
And we'll touch on the pros and cons of NDES and PKCS in the PKCS video, I think. So coming up in the next series of the videos. So we've just created this, right? We haven't done anything with it. So
correct,
stick around for the next video, which is going to be on what you can do with the certificate once you've done it and how to deploy it for different scenarios. So Android, iOS, and Windows devices.
And macOS.
And macOS. Whatever.
And loves macOS.
I do. It's the best. And then once we've done that, we'll then circle back and then we'll show you how to basically do the same thing, but with PKCS, because that is, I guess, sort of becoming the de facto standard, the default. Yeah.
And then once we get to that point, we'll start looking at how you can talk to your networking team for authentication into Wi-Fi and things like that, because
bring a baseball bat.
It's a conversation where, as I've said to a couple of my peers, it's it's a Venn diagram of 3 different groups trying to figure out how to make it all work, being the identity team, the networking team, and the end-user compute team. Each have a very important position to add to the table.
Yeah.
But they can't work in isolation. So it's how you can engage your networking team and identity team to ensure that you have that great experience and great conversation.
Awesome. Good work, Steve. I can't believe we got that working as quickly as we could.
Yeah.
Cool. So everyone, thank you for putting up with us. I know this has been painful. Stick around for the next series of videos. I promise you they're a lot easier. And enjoy certificates.
Yeah, because you'll have to.
Because you're certified.
You'll have to learn about them.
Awesome, guys. All right. Well, we'll see you in the next one.
So.